Okay, picture this. It's 1:23 a.m. on April 26, 1986. Inside reactor number 4 at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, the entire building suddenly shakes. The reaction is spiraling out of control. So, an operator does the only logical thing you can do. He slams the emergency shutdown button. And in that instant, the reactor explodes. This was the start of the world's worst ever nuclear disaster. So the big question is, how on earth could a button designed to save the reactor be the very thing that blew it to pieces? Let's get into it. And when I say explode, I don't mean a small pop. This was a cataclysm. It literally blew the 1,000-ton lid clean off the reactor core and just spewed a poison cloud into the night sky. How much poison? Well, get this. It released 400 times the radioactive material of the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima, an invisible cloud that would eventually drift over all of Europe. And that really is the heart of the mystery, isn't it? How does the ultimate failsafe, the big red off switch, become the trigger for the entire catastrophe? To figure that out, we've got to take a quick look under the hood of the reactor itself. So, let's do that. Let's pop the hood on this thing. At its core, a nuclear reactor is really just a ridiculously complicated way to boil water. Seriously, the steam from that boiling water spins a turbine, and that turbine generates electricity. The real magic, the part we need to understand, is how it creates that mind-boggling heat in the first place. And that magic is called nuclear fission. You take an unstable atom, in this case uranium-235, and you split it. When it splits, it releases a massive amount of energy as heat, but it also fires off extra neutrons. And here's the key part. Those neutrons fly out and split other atoms, which release more neutrons, which split more atoms. You get it. It's a self-sustaining chain reaction. The whole game is about controlling that reaction. Probably the easiest way to wrap your head around this is to just think of the reactor like a car. The uranium fuel rods, that's your engine, where all the power is made. The accelerator, the gas pedal, that's something called a graphite moderator, which speeds up that chain reaction. And the brakes, those are the boron carbide control rods. Their job is to soak up neutrons and slow the whole thing down. Pretty simple, right? You've got your gas and you've got your brakes. Okay, so keep that car analogy in mind. Let's go back to that night. The whole reason the reactor was even in this unstable state was because the crew was running get this, a routine safety test. The irony is just off the charts. So the test was actually pretty straightforward. They wanted to know if there was a total blackout, could the turbines, just by spinning down, generate enough leftover power to run the essential water pumps for a minute or two, just long enough for the backup diesel generators to fire up. I mean, those pumps are absolutely critical. They circulate the coolant that stops the reactor from overheating. This was literally a test designed to prevent a meltdown. But here's where things start to go wrong. As they were preparing for the test by lowering the reactor's power, something strange happened. The reactor basically started choking on its own exhaust fumes, a byproduct gas called xenon-135. Think of xenon like sludge building up in the engine. It just loves to absorb neutrons, acting like an extra set of brakes that nobody asked for. And this is where the dominoes really started to fall. First, that xenon poisoning made the power level plummet, way below what they needed for the test, down to almost zero. So to fight this, the supervisor makes a truly fatal call. He orders his operators to pull out almost all of the control rods, the brakes. They were left with just 8, when safety rules demanded an absolute minimum of 15. With the brakes gone, the reactor surged. Water started flashing into steam, which only made the reaction go faster. The car was now redlining, completely out of control. And so the operators did the only thing they could. They hit the big red button, emergency shutdown. So they slammed on the brakes to stop this runaway reaction. But instead of stopping, the whole thing just exploded. Why? Why would slamming on the brakes do the exact opposite of what they're supposed to do? Well, the answer lies in a single, catastrophic flaw hidden in the reactor's design. So this is the billion-dollar question, right? How can hitting the brakes possibly act like stomping on the gas? The answer, which was a state secret at the time, was an unbelievable flaw in the design of the RBMK reactor. Here it is, the control rods, the brakes, were made of boron, which is great at absorbing neutrons. But their tips were made of graphite, the exact same material used as the accelerator. So for the first few critical seconds, as those rods were being lowered back into the core, the first thing the reactor saw wasn't the brake, it was more accelerator. For one brief, fatal moment, slamming on the brakes was the same as flooring the gas pedal in a car that was already completely out of control. The power output surged from about 200 megawatts to an estimated 33,000 megawatts. That's more than 10 times its maximum design limit. The result? Two massive explosions that blew the reactor core to pieces. But the explosion, that was just the beginning. The aftermath would poison the land, its people, and the politics of a global superpower for decades to come. The immediate human cost was just horrific. Firefighters showed up thinking it was a normal roof fire and were hit with lethal doses of radiation. 28 of them died agonizing deaths within months. The Soviet Union actually tried to cover the whole thing up for 2 days, until radiation alarms started going off at a plant in Sweden. A 30-kilometer exclusion zone was evacuated, and hundreds of thousands of so-called liquidators were sent in to clean up, exposing them to incredibly dangerous levels of radiation. But even in all that horror, there was unbelievable heroism. See, there was a huge pool of radioactive water sitting right under the melting reactor core. If that molten core burned through the floor and hit the water, it would have caused a steam explosion so powerful it could have made most of Europe uninhabitable. 3 men, 3 volunteers, accepted a suicide mission to swim through that pitch-black radioactive water to open the drain valves. They saved a continent. And incredibly, all 3 survived the dive. The financial cost was just as unbelievable. When you add up the cleanup, the relocation of hundreds of thousands of people, and the long-term healthcare, the total cost is estimated at around $235 billion. For the already struggling Soviet Union, it was an economic gut punch that it just couldn't recover from. Many historians say it was a major reason for its final collapse just a few years later. And containing the still deadly reactor has been one of the biggest engineering projects in history. They hastily built a concrete shell called the sarcophagus back in 1986. But decades later, when that started to crumble, an even bigger effort began, building the new safe confinement. This was a $3 billion colossal arch that was built nearby and then slid over the old structure, designed to keep the site safe for the next 100 years. But here's the final, strange twist in the Chernobyl story. In the decades since humans left, the 30-kilometer exclusion zone has completely transformed. It's actually become one of Europe's largest nature preserves, a thriving, though still radioactive, home for wolves, bears, wild boar, and all sorts of other wildlife. And so we're left with this incredible story. It's a story about a fatal design flaw, about terrible human error, and unimaginable sacrifice. But it's also a story about nature's strange and powerful resilience. It really makes you ask a pretty fundamental question about all of our ambitions and our creations. What is the true price of progress?